Self-storage, am I right? Self-storage is a massive industry and they come in all different types of shapes and sizes, but only until recently, with something called the sharing economy, did we see a little bit of a variation from the norm. So today, we're gonna be chatting about this, which is your traditional self-storage facility that prides themselves on the security of your possessions. And we're gonna be chatting also about this, which is my attic. It is very hot here.
All right, pardon the sweat. So closer to about a decade ago, you saw the uptick and pretty big rise in delivery storage or valet storage. Valet storage took off pretty overwhelmingly, and there are a slew of competitors in that specific market. That type of storage is a lot of times made up of situations where you don't even see your physical storage being stored. They might use warehouses, and everything, all transactions are done online or via an app. So you say, hey, I want to pick up my pair of skis today, and they'll bring them to you. I need to store more things, we'll send a truck, that kind of thing. Come to think about it, it is funny to put valet storage into the self-storage name when you are not doing it yourself. You sort of take the self out. It should be called help me storage. Anyway, what if you take the traditional self-storage model and the valet storage model and you rip them of their biggest capital investment, their biggest asset that they have themselves, which is real estate. That's when you start to get into a bit of the territory that Stash and Neighbor.com find themselves in, where people use parts of their home to rent out available space. One of the biggest questions in today's episode is going to be a little bit about the consumer. You know, the self-storage industry is massive, and the consumer base for storage is exploding year after year. But that brings about the question about whether this new model of self-storage is cutting into the existing storage consumer or whether or not they're creating a consumer base of their own. This is exactly one of the questions I had for Joseph Woodbury, who's the CEO of Neighbor.com. Let's dive into it. How much do you think you're converting new customers versus stealing customers that could be going to like a traditional format?
Well, that's the amazing thing about this market. Storage it's obviously huge. We are certainly providing a service that we view as better than the alternative, but that doesn't necessarily mean people are switching. It can be inconvenient to switch out of an existing unit. Rather, we're all just helping capture and provide services for that new demand that's coming on every year. That another way to think of it is this industry's, 10 years ago, the occupancy rate in this industry was like, high 80s%, right? 87, 88%. This year, I was looking at the 10Ks for public storage, extra space storage. They all closed out the year at 95% occupancy, which is just crazy, especially when you consider that we're spending $5 billion a year just on new construction. And when you're spending $5 billion a year on new construction and your occupancy rate is going up, that means 100% of $5 billion in construction got filled. It was built and filled in the same year it was built. When you look at it from that lens, like we're almost not stealing a single customer from traditional self-storage facilities. When you're operating at 95% occupancy, you're not hurting for customers, right? You have filled, they can't build fast enough. So all we're doing is we're acting as kind of a pressure release valve, right? We're coming into a lot of these markets, like New York, for example, that's historically undersupplied. Fewer square feet of storage per person than any city in the country. And storage facilities can't even figure out how to get more storage into the city. It's like almost impossible. And we can come in and unlock all of this latent supply, and the customers there are like, whew, we're so glad someone's got vacancy.
All right. Sharing economy. This consumer mindset has definitely shifted the way that we purchase, pursue, consume, and hold on to different goods and services. And there's a lot of different examples of the sharing economy. The first and foremost would be sort of the explosion of Lyft and Uber and the way we get around. That's certainly rattled the car community. There's a lot of studies that say that young people are not buying cars anymore. There's also obviously Airbnb, the sharing of households. You can give a stranger money in exchange to live in their household for a certain number of days. There's something called TaskRabbit. If you want a light bulb screwed in or an IKEA furniture built, you can go ahead and hire a stranger online to help you around the house. We all know about WeWork, may not be doing as well this year, but an example of a shared office space where people can work together. Then you also see it in fashion and retail. There's the ever popular Rent the Runway and ThredUp and companies like that offer clothing as secondhand. And then in the self-storage commercial real estate space, you have companies like Neighbor.com. You know, it goes without saying in sort of like the brunt of all of this is that the sharing economy has really brought about a different perception of the idea of a stranger. It's not to say that little kids still should not get in that sketchy van marked candy, but we certainly have a different perspective when we use a lot of these goods and services. I mean, we do get in the car with a stranger, if we do invite someone into our home, if we do wear some secondhand clothing from another person's life, we do live in a stranger's home. These are sort of things that we have now socially normalized. And that was one of the biggest things that stood out to myself, and I'm sure others, when you look at it at something like Neighbor.com. All that being said, I think it goes without saying that this sort of curve of normalization has also impacted the success of someone like Neighbor.com. People are a little bit more willing to store their items into someone's attic or garage or crawl space or corner of an office now that we've sort of lowered these bars a bit. Joseph had some pretty great insights into that specific conversation, so we'll go ahead and take a listen.
Yeah, we've definitely benefited from that, right? The sharing economy platforms that have gone before us have been in the business of you know, in the case of Airbnb, of storing people, or in the case of Uber, you know, transporting people. And so kind of the high liability companies came before us, where there's a lot of liability associated with like transporting a person or letting a person sleep in your home. It's a much lower like mental barrier to say, I'm going to let someone come into my home and sleep in my home. You know, it's a much lower barrier to say like, I'm going to let someone store their Christmas tree in my attic. You know, that's like a no-brainer at this point. So we definitely benefited from the fact that those marketplaces grew and people became comfortable with that, because it's much easier to become comfortable with Neighbor than it is to become comfortable with Uber or Airbnb. With that, you know, kind of on top of that, we're also providing a service that hits at, you know, because it's peer-to-peer, has a lot of advantages that way. In if you look at customer preferences, like if you read the very fascinating, you know, read the Self-Storage Almanac that I'm sure most people are like spending their nights reading.
Read it every day.
Yeah, every day. They talk in there about how proximity is the most important thing to a storage renter, even above price in a lot of circumstances. People just look for the facility closest to them, and we can come on, and we're called Neighbor for a reason. We can provide a garage, an attic, a basement that is literally several doors down, and you cannot get closer. And people feel this kind of connection when they're close to their items. It's like almost like their items never left their house. Whereas even the closest storage facilities, I mean, the average drive time to storage facility is like 30 minutes. They're all zoned industrial, so they're naturally not going to be close to these residential areas. So that's another area where we can kind of provide this peace of mind to consumers as they consider this new sharing economy alternative.
So Joseph's self-storage model at Neighbor.com really does benefit both parties. Not only do you have the consumer who's looking to put their stuff somewhere, but you also have the host who's sort of supplying the space in exchange for a couple bucks. Needless to say, during the ongoing pandemic, the idea that you could make money sitting on your couch was a pretty popular one. So you know, the sheer premise of Neighbor.com certainly was pretty popular. The ripple from COVID affected Neighbor.com in a certainly positive way, but let's take a look at traditional self-storage. Occupancy has been trending in the upward direction. I'm going to go ahead and let Corey Sylvester give a little market update for the self-storage industry in April of 2021. Let's take a listen.
Right. So what this is, 10 by 10 climate controlled rates, just using the REIT's daily pricing. For a frame of reference, let's just say this is the beginning of 2021. Roughly speaking, $136 for a 10 by 10 starting the beginning of the year. And right now we're in the beginning stages of spring lease-up season, and you're seeing pricing really spike. And I think that has to do with the fact that occupancies, generally speaking for the industry, are much higher than they've ever been at this point in time. And when you have occupancies that are this high, the ability to increase rate on the marginal customer that's coming in the door is just that much higher. This is kind of what we were expecting, which is that REITs and self-storage operators have the ability to really, in a world where you didn't see massive move-outs, now that the reopening has started to occur, which we're not seeing yet, prices are going to spike. And normally, if you take a look at like January to kind of averaging June to August, the price change during that lease-up period is roughly 8 to 9%, really smoothing it out. And so you're seeing some pretty big increases in pricing. Obviously, you just can't go up like this forever, but the net of it is, we're in the beginning stages of spring lease-up season, and we're really seeing normal lease-up seasonality, but with an even higher magnitude in terms of how rates are increasing.
All right. We're going to end things today on a quote, because why not? We're going to end things today on a quote from one of the most famous neighbors to ever have existed. I'll give you 2 guesses as to who that is. He's inspired millions of people for generations, it seems, with brilliant words of wisdom. Let's go ahead and listen to what he has to say.
It's not so much what we have in this life that matters. It's what we do with what we have.
Preaching kindness, a very neighborly thing to do. That'll do it for today, though. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks for watching.